The reality is Illinois' existing revenue structure is not set up to support the promises that it has made in the past to support pensions, to support schools, to support public health, and to support public safety. And so there's going to have to be discussions about revenue in this General Assembly session to figure out how to make the stuff that we're spending money on match the money that we're coming in with. Illinois has been cutting its budget because they are not keeping up with inflation, and the revenue is not keeping up with inflation. So just as a quick example, even the last two budgets that we've had in the state of Illinois, if you look at just community colleges, we've had better budgets than we've seen for a long time. But this last budget, they increased community college spending by 2%. But inflation was 4%. So what happens? That's the reality of that is a budget cut for us. We are now 2% in the hole from the state of Illinois. And then where does that go? Two things happen. We have to push up tuition. So we're asking our students to pay more because our tuition, because the spending, because the state's not keeping up, or we have to cut services. And we're seeing those service cuts happen. We're seeing when there's pressure to hire back counselors, to hire back librarians, to keep like even like recruitment offices, advisors, all of these services that help make our colleges go are run on a shoestring because the income isn't there from the state to support them at the level that they should be supported at.
We're stretched thin, and people are asked to do much more with less. And I see plenty of examples where where things fall through the cracks. We don't have the same services available for students. We don't have enough staff. We don't have enough faculty. Simply because we're trying to kind of keep things operating as best we can. But that's I have looked at it as kind of a band-aid approach. Like we're getting through, we're surviving, but because of that lack of funding, we're not able to really grow. We're not able to really move towards a future that's better for the community and for students.
People leave, they do not replace them at all.
We've also, with budget cuts, have completely lost part-time counselors. We used to have a number of part-time counselors at Triton. We currently have 0. We are down to 5 full-time counselors with 1 person retiring, and we're not sure if we're going to be approved to replace that person. There seems to be a lot of sunsetting. It's not just at Triton that this is being experienced, but we've seen this across the state in terms of community colleges reducing their counseling, especially faculty counseling support, whether it's sunsetting as people retire or leave, or if it's completely closing programs and reopening them with non-faculty members. We've seen that happen at places like McHenry County. We've seen it happen at Joliet Junior College. We've seen it happen at College of Lake County. And these places have some form of mental health services available, but they're not faculty counselors. Problem with not having faculty counselors is you're going to have more turnover, because one of the benefits of being faculty, of course, is tenure, and it allows that longevity and that consistency of care. And when you get rid of people having that dedication to one place for their entire career, students really are the ones who lose out.
Harold Washington has 3 full-time librarians. They really should have 4 or 5. Truman has 1. KK has 2. Kennedy King has 2. And they have now chopped off the library and made it more for the nursing and health sciences. Daly has 1 full-time librarian. Wright has 2 full-time librarians. And Olive Harvey only has 1 full-time librarian.
Another issue with the budget cut that's coming from the state is that it makes it hard for us to negotiate raises. And that impacts every single one of our members, right? When you go to the table and our administrators, even when we have administrators that are well-intentioned and want to keep us competitive in terms of salary and benefits, they have trouble doing that even when they have the right intentions, because the state budget isn't there to support them.
This past negotiations, the equalization grant was a major issue they brought up, and because it was an obvious number that they could point to show how much less revenue they were getting. So the equalization grant is supposed to, particularly help out lower income communities and schools in those areas. And I forget the exact numbers, but we were getting, a sizable amount that was helping in our district. And this past year, we didn't meet the funding levels, and so I think we were dropped to $50,000, which is the minimum the equalization grant you gets. I think usually we got somewhere in 3 to 4 million. I'm not sure the exact number. And so that was a substantial hit. Our board was still able to create a balanced budget, but obviously that puts pressure on, us not being able to rehire positions. Like, in fact, we've had a number of retirements over these last 10, 15 years, and a number of those positions haven't been filled, or in many cases are just slow filled because of the lack of funding.
And they know that they can only push tuition so far. Every dollar of tuition that goes up, are students that are getting pushed out of our system. So we really need the state of Illinois to come through for us, because it impacts students, it impacts us at the bargaining table, it impacts the services and the quality of services that our colleges can afford.
And the board members being in the community are very aware of the struggles of the community. And so, yeah, they're very reluctant to raise tuition and fees if they don't feel they need to. But again, because of the lack of state funding, because of the lack of, a significant tax base, it really leaves us with this gap that we can't easily fill by just raising tuition on the students.
If we cut these programs, we're cutting out such a huge population, and then they're not going to be able to have the support that they need in order to thrive. And we're going to lose them as students.
The options that Illinois really faces is to cut services because the revenue is not keeping up. And if they cut services, that means not paying money to local high schools, not paying money to community colleges, not keeping up public health services. Or Illinois really needs to find ways to keep up revenue. Other states have started to tax services and not just tax goods. So Illinois' tax structure is kind of left over from the 20th century, even the middle of it, early 20th century, where they're taxing things and not taxing services. And so that's revenue that is missed that could go into the state budget that we're not taking advantage of. So the other challenge with this change to thinking about like the service economy is that the taxing goods is a regressive tax, because all of us, no matter what income level, have to buy food, we have to buy clothes, we have to buy the basic necessities that we have in life. But there's a lot of services that only people that can afford them really take advantage of. So most of us don't have our own personal lawyer on retainer. But the people that can afford to have their own personal lawyer, they're not paying taxes on that, right? Most of us can't afford to have our own bookkeeper, but the people who can, again, aren't paying taxes on that. One big impact on the state budget is pensions, and all of us in Local 1600 benefit from these pensions. And this is a promise and a commitment that the state has made to us. And what has happened is that 20 years ago, the state put in the pension ramp. And this is the idea that in the early years, they pay a little bit. And over time, they pay a little bit more and a little bit more. And the thought being that if you just tack on an extra percent here, an extra percent there over time, it'll be easier for the state to absorb that cost. But what it really did is that those legislators that put this in place like 20 years ago, they kind of ducked out. Like none of them are left. They voted through the law, and now they're no longer in office anymore. And they kind of kicked the can down the road to the future. Well, now the future is here, and those payments into pensions, into other services, the system for supporting K-12 is another example. It's grown to a bit where it's now a larger portion of the state's budget, and we can't just keep up the same old tax structure to manage these bills. We have to find new ways to support this and keep it going forward, or the pension system's not going to be solvent. And all of us that are relying on the pensions because we're not paying into Social Security, all of us that are relying on pensions for our retirement security, that retirement security is really going to be at risk. And in Illinois, 50% of our general revenue fund comes from individual taxes. And that's not true for every state across the country. That's a heavy burden that we as individual taxpayers have to carry on because of our outdated tax system. we have a flat tax. Every one of us, no matter how much we make, no matter how little we make, we pay 4.9% of our income to the state of Illinois, which is actually a pretty modest amount when you look around. Now, a lot of states have a graduated income tax where the more you make, the more you pay in taxes. And you don't pay your first dollar. All of us pay the same on the first dollar. But once you start making over, $200,000 a year, that money gets taxed at a different rate than the first $200,000 that you make. And that's how a graduated income tax works. Some people don't understand. They think that, oh, it's not fair because everyone's going to get hit differently. Actually, everyone gets hit the same. The problem for most of us is we just don't make $500,000 to get taxed at that higher rate down the road. And that's where we're leaving money on the table for the state of Illinois. And those are the three options that we really have to deal with. So cut services, service tax, change how we do our income tax. And the reality is, we in our colleges can't take more service cuts. Like, we're barely keeping up with where we are. We're really challenged when we go to the negotiating table. The income tax is probably a long shot. Like, it's probably we tried to change it a few years ago. It didn't go through. The reality of moving to a graduated income tax, even though that would be useful, is probably slim. The best option we really have is to think about how can we put service taxes in place that are manageable, that make sense, and that also have the people that can afford those services pay their share to help keep our state healthy and to keep our services where they need to be.